test the audio?
I'm going to log on to it
Right
first.
now, all right. Hey,
Okay, let's test it.
ready? Okay, testing 1, 2, 3. How can you hear us out there on live stream? Get ready to start doing my podcast and my job. You be on
Got to work on that podcasting voice.
Okay.
Some people say I have a good voice for radio.
Absolutely.
As long as they don't have good looks.
Not on radio.
Right.
So low-hanging fruit, though. I mean,
Too open. You're doing that wrong, man. All right. Well, good morning to everybody who is joining us, watching online, and those that we have here in person. We're really glad to have you all here this morning. We are talking about the moral case for creating a culture of child well-being, shifting hearts and minds to save our sons and daughters. And I am honored and just privileged to have such an esteemed panel of faith leaders here in Winston-Salem, and we've got one or two who may be on their way, one of whom is on their way, so we look forward to having them join us as well. Before we get started, though, I want to turn things over to Rabbi Charlie, who has been so gracious. I call him Rabuni every time I see him. He's been so gracious to host us here at Temple Emmanuel in this beautiful space, which he'll tell us just a brief bit more about here at the Lamb Center. So, Rabbi Charlie, thank you for hosting, and if you would welcome us to the space.
Absolutely. So thank you, and we're thrilled to be able to host. We're here at the Lamed Center. The Lamed Center was created. This used to be the sanctuary of Temple Emmanuel. That's kind of why it looks like this behind us. Although, in addition to that, it has become a place of learning. It's in memory of 2 children who were killed in a terrible accident, and the parents, the Blocks, really wanted to make sure that this space would become a space for learning. It's called the Lamed Center. Lilmod, it's a study, is at the heart of Jewish tradition. Caring for our children, appreciating our teachers, is a big part of who we are and what we do. Every time we have a Brit Mitzvah, when a young person becomes 13, we not only honor the child, we honor not only the parents, we also honor the teachers, the religious and secular teachers that child has ever had. And we invite them to come forward because we look at our teachers as like our parents because of the impact they have on young people. And we know how strong that is, how important that is. And so today to be able to host a conversation about child well-being, very appropriate to be doing that here in this space.
Thank you so much, Rabbi Charlie. And to those from Faith and City Coalition, others who are in the audience, so glad to have you all here today. Again, I welcome those who are watching online. The How Are the Children campaign is about shifting the way that we have done things in this community. It's about shifting our mental models, the way that we are thinking about child well-being. It ultimately is about shifting how and where we invest the resources that we have in this community. Ultimately, the How Are the Children campaign is challenging both the public and private sector, in particular our county government, our city government, to invest 1% of Forsyth County's gross domestic product in each of the 7 vital conditions that we know are necessary for well-being. And of course, several of those directly intersect with child well-being. When we're talking about humane housing, when we're talking about our education systems, when we're talking about access to reliable transportation, we're talking about the built environment. And that is going to come out to about $1 billion that we're talking about when you look at all of the 7 vital conditions, and about $200 million, for each of those 7 vital conditions. And we know we just went through a struggle to try to get $33 million just for the school system alone. So we have some work to do. One of the things that we have recognized from very early on is that while there is an economic case that needs to be made, and that, a lot of our partners are working on the nuts and bolts of that, even to have got to this point of identifying this 1% of gross domestic product. Before we can ever manifest that reality in terms of how people are moving in the ballot box, how people are moving in community, how people are moving in budget meetings where priorities are being decided upon, because of course Bishop Barber talks about the fact that our budgets are moral documents. They indicate what is most important to us. We have to have the conversation about how we organize those priorities morally in our minds and in our hearts. And that is the work of our faith leaders throughout this community of Winston-Salem. And so this panel of faith leaders here has been very intentionally kind of invited into this space, because each of them in one way or another has demonstrated their commitment to engaging in these public conversations, to moving outside the 4 walls of the church or the synagogue or the mosque in terms of work with community, recognizing the implications that that has for how we live together as neighbors and friends from day to day. And so to get started, we're going to go around this circle and start with Pastor Griffin and just ask each of our faith leaders to just very briefly introduce yourself, the faith community, your role in that faith community, and then we'll pass it on to the next one as we go around.
I'm Renee Griffin. I'm the pastor at Winston Memorial United Church of Christ.
Good. And also I had this, where is that located, just so we can place this for people as they're watching online or listening.
And we're located on Carver School Road.
Very good. Thank you. Glad to have you this morning.
Sarah Howell, I'm the pastor at Green Street United Methodist Church. We're in the West Salem neighborhood, just south of downtown Winston.
Craig Chow, I'm one of the pastors of Parkway United Church of Christ. We're on Silas Creek Parkway in Winston-Salem.
Anthony Lee Jr. I'm the pastor of Dreamland Park Missionary Baptist Church. Our church is located right in the center of the Dreamland Park community, right off of 311.
Rabbi Charlie Citron Walker, rabbi here at Temple Emmanuel, and we're here in Ardmore.
Reverend Dr. Randall, aka Junior Pastor of Zion Memorial Missionary Baptist Church, which is basically still on one side of the highway to see Winston-Salem State. You look right across the highway up on the hill, Zion Memorial.
Up on the hill. That's the best thing going for you, man. Up on the hill. Coming off the highway.
Amy Carlin, I'm one of the pastors at First Presbyterian. I do discipleship and mission, and we're in downtown.
George Ohio Redeemer Presbyterian Church. I'm one of the pastors there as well, and we're right around the corner here in Ardmore.
Jenny Tobiason, pastor at Home Moravian Church in Old Salem.
John Mendez, retired pastor from Emmanuel Baptist Church, and presently doing more psychotherapy work. I'm a trained psychoanalyst, and I work at least 3 days a week. Rest of the time is mine, so I can enjoy the time.
Write that book. He's writing a book on Black liberation and psychology, so it's going to be powerful when it comes out. So I want to start this conversation with you, Pastor Lee, and in talking about this roundtable today, this discussion. You shared with me your experience
working with one of the families that was impacted by the shooting at Lineback Park that rocked this community earlier this spring. And that testimony really kind of emphasizes, I think, for all of us, why the urgency of now remains ever present with the discussion about child well-being, and as this theme says, shifting hearts and minds to, in very literal material terms, save the lives of our sons and daughters. So I wanted to invite you to just share a bit about, the situation working with that family and how it has impacted you in terms of understanding the importance of what we are ultimately trying to accomplish here with this Howard Children campaign.
Well, thank you. Thank you for the opportunity to be here on this panel, and especially amongst the esteemed panel that we have here. It's a pleasure to be here with you. I found myself in the aftermath of not just the Lineback Park incident, but also in the aftermath of the incident that happened in Norfolk Site. We remember the stabbing that took place at Norfolk Site High School. The day that the children were returned back to school, they invited pastors in the city to come and to pray in the school. I happened to see the video, and even in communication with the principal, I literally stood on the very spot where that young man lost his life. He fell as he came out of the bathroom. And so I'm standing there praying and find myself once again in the aftermath of a horrific situation where a young man has lost his life. In regards to the Lineback Park incident, I didn't know until after the fact, when the family of the young man had reached out to us for support, because this family, after they had lost the life of their son, wanted to have the wake in the community, within our Hispanic community. I know it's kind of foreign just to hear about it now, but there was a time, I remember as a young man, as a young child growing up, where the family would bring the body home, and they would have the wake or the viewing at the home, and so that was their tradition, and so they wanted to bring him home. And this is in the aftermath of everything that's going on. So there's still the tension of gang-related violence. There's still the tension of what's going to happen next. And so here the family is asking, we need help. Like I said, our church is located right in the center of a residential community. And there was literally nowhere to park. That on a regular day, it's tough to get down that street. And so they asked if we would just open up our parking lot and allow them space so they could use the facilities. Me being a good citizen, I reached out to our Winston-Salem Police Department and made them aware that this was what was going to take place, so that they could, if there was something wrong, they would be aware of it. I'm not going to say where the comment came from or where the answer came from, but there was a message that returned back to me that this was still an ongoing investigation, and that if you want, that there's a possibility that your church parking lot could become a crime scene. So here I'm left with the dilemma of, do I do what's right for this family, or do I basically cower in fear and take a step back? I chose to serve the family. I said word back. I said, well, listen, my charge is to serve my church in this community. Your job is to protect and serve. If we both do our job, I believe we're going to be okay. So we served that family. I went to go visit them 4 times throughout this time, and there was everything went peaceful. I'm talking about not one piece of trash was left in the parking lot, no incident. But unfortunately, we're showing up in the aftermath, and I think now we need to take a look at what can we do differently outside of helping the family or the community pick up pieces.
Amen. Amen. And to that point, I say often, just, as somebody who's invested in history wherever I go and having looked into a lot of the history of this community, it's always a reminder of what the Christian scriptures talk about, nothing new under the sun, that a lot of what we are talking about, to your point, that needs to be done proactively on the front end is not new. It's not things we haven't done before in this community. The thing that we have not done before is built the sort of coalitions and partnerships and infrastructure, and then provided the sustaining level of investment. Come on up, Pastor Scobie, just come right up these steps right here, and you can hop up here. The sustained investment from our public and private sectors, so that when the first set of volunteers gets tired, when the first set of elected officials or community leaders who are leading the charge moves on, that the work is not lost. That the work is not lost. And so the How Are the Children campaign, when we talk about the financial level of investment, and when we talk about the infrastructure that needs to be built, is what's going to make the difference in terms of us being able to carry this work forward over time, right? So that the progress that is made does not then fizzle and we come back to this. And to that point, one of the reasons why I thought it was really important to have Dr. John Mendez here, who spent 36 years, if I recall correctly, at Emmanuel Baptist Church, and was a critical community leader. There was an effort about a quarter century ago, and you can pull up the report online, the HATC report, on a community collaboration that brought together the universities and the city government and the county government and faith communities and the police departments and law enforcement to respond to, at that time, a rising tide of violence in our communities, the types of conditions that were the impetus for the police department asking the city council, successfully I might add, yesterday, to impose a citywide curfew on all young people under the age of 18. And Dr. Mendez, having been a part of the solution 25 years ago, what can you offer us in this moment in terms of how we need to focus our work as public leaders, as faith leaders, responding to this moment, and as being a part of building that wider coalition and building the case for a set of priorities that will actually address the root cause of the issues and not just deal with the symptoms?
First thing I want to say is that taking punitive measures is not the way.
Yes.
And it's sad that's the only kind of solution that they can come up with. To be stable, to live stable lives, there are at least three things that's necessary. One is positive mirroring. Young people need to feel like they are somebody, that they matter. Second, they need people to idolize, people that they can trust and feel a sense of closeness to, and people that they can trust. Thirdly, like minds, so that they don't feel like misfits. One of the things that we constantly ignore is that when you're dealing with poverty, oppression, which gets left out all the time, but especially the young people that we take these punitive measures toward, we forget most of them come out of oppressed communities. And oppression is not just economic, political, cultural, even religious, and economic, but psychological. And psychological oppression turns you against yourself, makes you participate in your own oppression, as well as identify with the oppressor. My ministry through the years has been, how to move people from being against themselves to being for themselves, and to participate in their own liberation. That's not easy, but that's a task. And some of the particulars, and I was so happy to hear that, Rabbi, earlier when I walked in to see the youth programs and the children programs that's going on. One of the things that I did when I was pastoring was set up both an after-school tutorial program as well as a summer youth camp for basically poor working class people, and we had a great time. And now that I'm retired, I bump into a lot of these young people from time to time, and just this past week, yesterday in fact, a young brother I didn't even recognize him, about your height now, was telling me he was just telling his girlfriend the other day about what I had done at the church and how it inspired him. I was at a Starbucks restaurant where I go do a lot of my work, and a grandmother came in with her grandson who was in one of our youth programs, and she was saying how he constantly talked about some of the things that I did with the kids at that time and how it had inspired him, and he's doing extraordinary work. I'm just saying all that to say that our young people need programs. Some of you may know that I took 100 kids up to the mayor's office some years ago, demanding jobs. That's how we initially got the summer youth jobs. We started with the churches, and Doc here was very supportive. Kids were able to work, but for a lot of the oppressed kids, they could make money for school, buy clothes and help the families out. But those are the kinds of things that this community should be doing. We did it before. Dr. Chern was one that initiated the summer basketball camps and all of that. And that was designed to take the kids off the streets, away from the different businesses where they were gathering, and we opened it up even late at night. And it was a tremendous response. We can do this. We know what to do. But we got to change the priorities and move from being punitive to being creative.
Thank you, Doc. Doc, and so Pastor Stovins, just want to welcome you to the space, and as you answer this question, just briefly introduce yourself, faith, and you represent where you're located. I was just over at your church on Saturday, Galilee, for a powerful, packed-out house full of men as kind of a pre-Father's Day men's prayer breakfast, and the lay leaders who were leading some of the conversation there were talking about the importance not only of our role as fathers to our own children, or those who kind of been presented to us to raise in terms of caring for ourselves, so that we can also then best step up to the responsibilities and care for responsibility for them, but then also the work that needs to be done to fill the gaps for the fatherless children, right? For the children where the fathers are not as present, whether it is the need for positive male role models, particularly black men, in our schools, which we constantly talk about, or just in our parts of the community. So recognizing that there is a playbook here, like the men just pointed to. We don't not know what to do. We know what to do. It's all about how we implement that in each present age. Can you just talk a bit from your vantage point at Galilee and your engagement as a community leader with how you're trying to model some of that out of that ministry?
Well, it starts
just again, your name, the church you have, where it's located, is that base?
Nathan Scoggins in Galilee Missionary Baptist Church, 4129 Northampton Drive, here in Winston-Salem. And I apologize, our senior deacon transitioned this morning, so we wanted to have to be there for that family, got to go back. But it starts with me. I live by the premise that I cannot ask others to do what I'm not willing to do myself. So I personally, over my years, tried to invest not only in my children, but in others. And so we model that. I believe in a holistic approach. And we tried to have intergenerational concepts of ministry whereby both generations learn from each other. So on Saturday, you mentioned the men's fellowship. It was really an opportunity for men to gather with their fathers and sons. So we believe that all of us are responsible for each other. And so we try to encourage our men to expand their family circle by including other young people in that component. So it's difficult now as a church sometimes to do a lot of programming because a lot of the funding that we were able to tap into years ago is no longer there. And
So
so
my funding internal to the church or outside?
outside of the church, you know, there's always this notion of where's the church, what is the church going to do? The church has to still function and maintain its programming and opportunities, whether there's funding or not. But we have to really be very strategic with our resources to make sure that we are continue to meet the needs of the community. And so it has been a challenge that we've tapped into scouts, trying to produce Eagle Scouts. But that cost.
Right.
We provide mentoring. I had an after-school program, had summer camp, but the cost of trying to provide those things really kind of took us out. And so
It sounds like there's a deep readiness to partner.
Yes.
Right outside, the four walls of Galilee with others who are invested in that after-school work and that kind of
Yes.
work. Yeah.
And so what we've done is to shift our Sunday morning experience to really focusing on our children, making sure that our programming on Sunday is there. If we can't necessarily do it during the week.
Appreciate that.
So it's just a resource thing
I
sometimes.
understand. Pastor Griffin, I want to bring you in here because Pastor Scoggins made a reference to the intergenerational approach that they take, even just in the context of this past Saturday's event that was intended for fathers to bring their sons or young men that they're playing a father role to. And when we have had some discussions in some of our smaller groups about this How the Children campaign and kind of, you can speak a bit more about this level and kind of the day-to-day work you do with senior services, you have pointed to the importance of, in making the public case and even just in thinking about what it takes for child well-being to really emphasize that intergenerational piece, how a thriving situation for our children, which is what this campaign is seeking much of the resources for, is also going to benefit our seniors. But then I think there's also that other piece, to Pastor Scoggins' point, of how these intergenerational activities can create opportunity for our young people to benefit from the wisdom and the time that many of our seniors have, the lifelong lessons, the kind of testimonies that not many of them share from a pastoral perspective. So I just wanted to have you get in with that thought process for a moment.
Well, thank you. I thought about it a lot. What do I want to say? Is my position different from other people's position? I've spent the vast majority of the other part of my life working with older adults and understand that I do think it's the right question to ask, how are the children? And it's important that we understand when we ask that question, that we have all those other components behind it that go into making a child's well-being good, with that proper English. That, you know, we do work with grandparents who are raising their grandchildren. So and I firmly believe that all of us know an older adult who has found themselves raising their grandchild, most often because something that our society has gone wrong. And so when we talk about how are the children, we also have to answer the question, and are we providing support to those grandparents who are stepping into those roles of parenting, who are also grieving because maybe something did not go well with their children, but do they have the support and do they have the resources? And, you know, if you can imagine being 70, 75 years old and now you're raising a 4-year-old,
Right.
and how the school system has changed from the time when you were raising your children, how you have perhaps allocated your resources, and now you find yourself with a different set of demands on you. How do you make plans for who's going to care for this child when I'm no longer here?
Sure.
So those are all, I think, important things for us to make sure are part of this conversation. We talk a lot about creating an age-friendly foresight. And people think that means we're just talking about seniors. But I know that what's good for an older adult is good for a family.
That's right.
So if we make adjustments to our infrastructure that are going to make it safer for an older person, we're also making it safer for a family with young children. So I just think it's important that it's like Dr. Bender says, we know what's right. We know what works. And it's about, are we willing to make the investment and stop making the excuses? You know, you and I had a conversation not long ago where I said, you know, we know the difference between right and wrong.
That's right.
We're just making, as a society, we're making a very intentional choice to do what is wrong for selfish reasons. And it's because we don't seem to understand that I can't be good if you're not good.
That's right.
If we don't believe that anymore, that to me is really what's at the root of the problem. And so I just, you know, there's a lot of research that shows that all of us have a better quality of life
Right.
when we have the opportunity to do it across generations, when we're not segregated, when younger lives are enhanced, so are older lives enhanced. And so, to me, that's just an important part of the conversation that I don't want us to get lost.
No, absolutely. I thank you for naming that, and I'm sure your answer to this would be yes, when we think about what Pastor Scovens pointed to in terms of the costs that burden, the types of things that we know are going to make an impact with our young people, and the need for those partnerships kind of outside the four walls, that Senior Services is the type of organization that's ready to be in partnership, but then also, if there were more resources behind that work, could scale out this sort of intergenerational approach even more. Is that fair to say?
It is, and I would also add that one of the challenges that we have is, as I try to create intergenerational opportunities, it's always the same places of privilege that come up to the table, who take advantage, because we have difficulty gaining access to families and children, a lot of times in the school system. And I'm just saying, you know, the school system is so overburdened, and teachers are just trying to keep their head above water. But one way that we can get, organizations like ours can get access to young people, is to have those partnerships in the community, to have those relationships with schools. But if it's all they can do just to keep their head above water, those opportunities never get passed on. And, you know, I end up providing wonderful opportunities for kids who already are having wonderful opportunities.
Right. Thank you so much for that. Thank you so much for that. Pastor Amy, Pastor George, I want to pull y'all into the conversation here because whether we are thinking about the framing that Dr. Mendez talked about in terms of the community that is so often targeted by these sort of punitive policies, such as the citywide youth curfew that was put in yesterday, the resources that are needed from a financial perspective to provide the capacity for faith communities, for organizations like Senior Services to kind of leverage these partnerships. We know we have a school system that, just to be blunt, is broke, compared to the way we kind of wanted to view things before, and so these community partnerships are now even more essential than they already were. All of that, certainly from the Christian lens, there's no other way to get around it, gets us into the politics of Jesus, right? And how we understand the responsibility of people of faith who are showing up for all the religious exercises of life, operate in community, make decisions about how they're going to participate in the electoral process, make decisions about whether or not they're going to stand, for or against budget priorities when that conversation is happening. And I know both of you have shared in conversations that I've had with you one-on-one and some small groups, just some of what you have to navigate through with your particular congregations in terms of what, and I will frame it this way, because I don't want to get you in any trouble you don't need to get into, because I said that I put on, but yeah, it's good trouble. I'm talking about only good trouble is what we're getting into here. That there is a disconnect for some people, because for hundreds of years there has been what I will call very firmly a false teaching that religion and politics don't mix. That somehow the religion of Jesus Christ, that at the time was existing in a world where there was no separation between churches, it was not even a concept that the religious and the political was separated. He was crucified because to say the kingdom of heaven is at hand was a direct threat to the emperor who wanted you to worship him, right? So I always am astonished at that, but it's a real thing that we are sorting through still in a lot of congregations that have inherited, again, what I would say is flawed theology. So those are my words, again, not yours. You want to claim those to your folks, you can say that kind of thing. But Pastor Amy, I kind of just invite you to lead in this conversation. How are you thinking about, how do you navigate through this at a place like First Pres?
That's a good question.
Yeah.
I don't know the answer to all the way. I think that's part of my struggles. I'm not sure what the answer is all the way. There's a wonderful book called Divided by Faith.
Yes.
Smith and Emerson, which if you haven't read, it talks about what, and I'm going to use this term, but white evangelical churches and what their culture is like. And by evangelical, I don't mean in the political sense, though I know it's hard to separate those sometimes. But our church fits into that for theological reasons, and we reflect this book, I think, in many ways, in which so many of our people, and I'll say this too, our churches, we have a wide spectrum of people. So the people who would absolutely agree with what you just said, and other people who would think, Amy, why are you sitting there? That's right. We have a wide spectrum in our church, so it makes it even more difficult. But there's certainly many people who would agree with Smith and Emerson and say it's all about relationships, period. And so they're going to learn about the data, they're going to hear about the school system, and they're going to say, I'm going to go volunteer twice a week to teach a kid to read at this school. And that's enough for me. And so that everything is about relationships and a high suspicion of institutions. And I think that's fair of our church, of a good portion of them, I would say anyway. And so trying to figure out how to help people meet them where they are and pull them along is a question that I think we're trying to figure out. That I'm trying to figure out anyway, because people very, very clearly in our culture, our wider culture, but certainly our church culture, you can just go find another church. right? So we can confront people and we can ask good questions. But I think to do it in a way that promotes growth is the key, and that's something that's just going to happen a little more slowly. And I think for our church, there are probably some lines that that even I would be uncomfortable crossing, like say, you need to vote for this person, or when we get very partisan, then I think. that's
Well,
difficult
and
for
so
our
is there a
church.
distinction on your mind between obviously the quote unquote sort of big negative partisan act of vote for this candidate versus that candidate, a distinction between that
Yes.
and saying vote for this agenda, right, in terms of policy priorities that align with the politics of Jesus, the way I would
I
do,
think
right?
in our church, it would be more like, here's the data, here are the stories, and how we vote is important,
Yeah, yeah,
without making that direct line.
I got you.
That could probably be something that works in our context and would still get some pushback. But saying, vote for this particular agenda,
Yeah.
we would hear about. And we wouldn't hear about it just in the like, I mean, we could say, there is no such thing as an anti-local church. We could say, yes, the politics of Jesus, but what I'm gonna give is I think this strategy works better than this strategy, actually, when we get into the nuance of those things, and so people can talk their way out of, this is the perfect agenda, if that makes sense.
So, but you think the data and the story.
I think that for our people,
Yeah.
I mean, I've been there for getting close to 20 years now,
Yeah.
that those things carry weight,
Yeah.
and then gently pushing about
Yeah.
the way we operate together as a culture matters. It is not only about relationships, and we've been talking about that, but there's more work to do.
And what are we as faith leaders if we are not storytellers, right?
Yes.
In terms of the story
Yes.
that we are seeking to get buy-in for. So Pastor Giorgio, how do you navigate that in meeting people where they are and trying to invest them in a story that moves them to greater action in community?
First of all, I'm just so glad to be with y'all. Y'all are amazing. One of the spiritual poverties of a church that is middle and upper middle class, predominantly white, is proximity. It's not proximity to power, it's a misunderstanding of proximity to power. And your kids are doing all right. Now, mental health wise, it's across the board, so we're all on that together. But there's also resources to cover some of that stuff. You can get out of a speeding ticket. You don't get arrested for it. And so I think the lack of proximity, I wouldn't even say relationships, though those are important. They're very, very powerful in terms of helping people understand another story. But I do think it's a failure of imagination and a story around what the kingdom of God is from our tradition. And it is a poverty. It's a spiritual poverty, and it's not. 90% of my people have no intended desire for that poverty, but don't know that there's a wealth out there. And so it's just really hard to orient people towards the beloved community, the more beautiful reality, because relatively speaking, it's pretty beautiful already. And so it's beautiful enough from that vantage point. So you're looking at great black and white TV. You just haven't seen the color TV yet,
Right.
or I should say, like 4K now. I don't know. My TV's pretty old. But yeah, I mean, it's just it is an imaginative narrative hope that is not easily captured because there's a C.S. Lewis quote about like being perfectly content making mud pies and realizing that that's what they're doing on vacation when you could be on the beach. I totally jacked it up. Sorry, Clive. But what we've done is really try to create a space. So we have a Sunday school class I teach probably every 3 years, definitely every political cycle, called Politics Christianity. And we created I'm not going to teach my Sunday school class completely, but the center one is public. Christianity is fundamentally public, but it's also fundamentally political, and it's also fundamentally personal. And the places we get messed up on are when it becomes only partisan and only private. And we actually call it a pentagonal prison because I'm a dork. But that Jesus does all these things. He does partisan stuff with the Sadducees and Pharisees at times, but not very much. He does private things. Don't make a big deal of your prayers. Don't know what your left hand. Don't make a big deal of your giving. But everything else is the dead center of the way Jesus talks about the kingdom. And so, yes, you can't say Jesus is Lord without it being political. And everything we do is public. And everything needs to be personal, from the heart, the circumcised heart. And so that's how we've been trying to orient towards those things. And then in our Sunday school class, every other class is conversation. And I make people say where they're on the spectrum, they put a card, and then they have to have a conversation with each other. So our church is getting purpler. And I'm grateful for that.
Thank you for that. So we're talking about expanding imagination for some folks, right? Expanding imagination beyond what looks pretty good from your vantage point of where you can see. We're also talking about what I would certainly characterize as the right teaching, which serves to reorient folks because the wrong teaching has been there. And, just to be transparent and blunt, these conversations around this campaign matter in different ways in different communities. And why this conversation matters so much for communities like the ones you two are serving is because there's so many resources, literally in the pockets of the people sitting in those pews.
Right.
And there's no faith community for whom that is more true, of course, in the Moravian Church writ large. Pastor Jennings, I'm going to pull you into this conversation. Let's just keep it real. Right? For the Moravian Church writ large, in terms of the history of the Moravian Church as a landowner, and of course the complicated history of its role in enslaving human beings over the course. And so I know you and I have had this conversation a lot and talked about your relationship with guys like Russ May, who is kind of the John Brown of Moravian Church. And I know he would appreciate you saying it. So I stay open. But how are you, as a faith leader, thinking about this in the context of your leadership for Home Moravian? And I know you're getting ready to transition to retirement, so God bless you on that. But as you think about your leadership in the Moravian Church in that context, and what Pastor and Pastor Giorgio had laid out, as well as everything else that you've heard, how does that all resonate in the space of the ministry that you have led, particularly in the context of trying to move people with resources to understand the importance as an expression of their faith, right? To bringing those resources to those for whom, if you believe what Gustavo Gutierrez teaches, God has a preferential option for. Right? Gustavo taught about the preferential option for the poor. And I believe that's a gospel truth, right? That's what I was raised on as a theologian. And so how do we help people on that journey?
In my congregation, it happens to be a well-resourced congregation, and they are aware of that and extremely generous. Home Moravian has a history of generosity and community work that goes all the way back to the founding of this community. And so I've found over the years my role is to be more like helping them understand that it's not always just about writing the check first. Getting involved with the Forsyth IAF organization and trying to explain to people that it was about building relationships first, and that teaches us where our resources can go. When people people want to know, just tell me where to write the check and I'll write it. Well, before you write the check, let's build a friendship, let's build a relationship outside of this church with somebody so we can truly understand what would benefit the community most. We're very good at the sort of come in and do a work and leave rather than long sustained relationship building. So we've been working more toward stepping back from making decisions for the community, what we think they need, stepping back and listening to learn more about how we can really be part of meaningful change in the community.
And you're talking in part, certainly in the way, I hear this, about a factor that we discuss a lot in the context of criminal justice reform in this country. And it's another way, I think, of framing some of what we've heard already, which is the empathy gap, right? I would dare say, Pastor George or Pastor Amy, that part of the challenge that you all are dealing with in terms of the reorientation, stretching the imagination, is helping these folks to be ready to do the work that's necessary to close the empathy gap, because it's hard to relate to people whose situation is completely different from yours. The view is looking so good from where you're sitting, as you all were saying. How can you even begin to understand how completely different that view is looking from people just a 5-minute drive across from downtown into East Winston, literally, right? How can you get folks to that point? And it becomes this critical piece of closing the empathy gap, because that is ultimately what we are needing to do. Because I will tell you that a lot of people who sit from my vantage point, I'm sure Dr. Mendes and others who would resonate with this, there's a seeming contempt for the poor, right? That seems to soothe out of, it's not necessarily conscious, but it seems to soothe out of some of the rhetoric, right? That gets into these public conversations, right? Because of the way we have portrayed, the Protestant work ethic in capitalism, the way we have portrayed, you're poor because you didn't work hard, you're poor because you didn't do this, you're poor because you didn't do that. There's a judgment rather than a recognition of their systemic structures here. So we have to close that empathy gap. It starts, to your point, with the listening. And I want to bring Pastor Sarah Shaw, Pastor Greg, into this conversation here in terms of the work of IAF, now Forsyth Strong, after a very successful public assembly on Sunday with 1,000 people packed out at Emmanuel Baptist Church. And the work that landed on the priorities for Forsyth Strong around mental health healthcare access, around more funding for EC support services in our schools, around reparative justice in terms of housing, whether it's through a community land trust, which Happy Hill Neighborhood Association is advocating for, other types of proposals there. We know that part of how we get to this is through building these deep and wide coalitions that cross lines of race, cross lines of class, cross lines of different interfaith traditions, ecumenical, all of that. How do you all see the work of Forsyth Strong and what that coalition represents? And please feel free to take just a minute or two and kind of laying that out for folks online who may not be as familiar with that, intersecting with this campaign to shift hearts and minds and save our sons and daughters and create a culture of child abuse. Pastor Cheryl, I'd like you to start.
I was hoping for you to start. So Sunday we officially publicly launched Forsyth Strong, Forsyth Fuerte, multiracial, broad-based community organization. Those words get a little jumbled, but and it's been many years process of building relationships, and the model that gets used, it's an IAF affiliate, Industrial Areas Foundation, weird outdated name, but the model involves building those relationships and then forming not around a particular issue, but around those relationships of solidarity, so that you can form a permanent organization that can address whatever might come up that affects groups that are part of that part of their organization. And so we did a listening campaign a while ago now, that we listened to over 1,100 people's stories, and out of those we surfaced kind of what were the issues that were impacting the most people, and came down to housing, mental health, and education. And from there, we've had research action teams that have been working on saying, okay, in these areas, which they're huge areas, right? What is something that is concrete that we can get done that will make a tangible impact in each of those areas? And it's sort of a testament to the complexity of each priority that housing ended up separating into 2 research action groups. So we had one that was on preventing homelessness and housing stability, and one that is more about affordable housing and the reparative justice that Roundtable mentioned. So we've been able to move forward in some pretty concrete ways, and none of those solve the whole problems. And I look at the work with Forsyth Strong as one tactic, one approach, one place of organizing that can intersect with and overlap with these other campaigns locally. And we talk a lot about how do we make sure we're not duplicating efforts and working. We have a particular way we work with partner organizations, but then there are always groups that aren't formally members but are still very much connected to the work that we're doing. And Reverend Ford and I chatted just briefly before this, noting that with our education research action team has secured some commitments from the county and from the school district around funding EC teacher hiring, and so that's where sort of the most obvious impact on children and teachers happens. But also when we look at the priorities around mental health and housing, those impact the children as well. And I think about these sort of intergenerational pieces that Reverend Griffin was talking about, and like knowing a member of my church who's a grandmother who often is caring for grandchildren and is in Section 8 housing, just knowing how much these pieces impact broad swaths of our community. So I'm excited to see how that develops and comes alongside some of these.
Pastor Craig, I want to ask you very specifically, building on what Pastor Sarah said, what do you see in the Forsyth Strong model, the IAF, Industrial Heritage Foundation's model, in the way it has played out to this point? You were part of change, many years ago, that can make the greatest contribution to this work of creating a culture of child well-being that shifts hearts and minds so that we can shift financial priorities in Winston-Salem, County.
Yeah, I know right before you talk about plantation politics.
Yes, I do.
So we got this sticky wicket of how do we address the disempowerment, the fatigue, and the hurt, this legacy in our community. And so that's a big job. And I feel like, you mentioned the empathy gap. Reverend Jenny talked about growing the ability for some of us to really listen rather than to say, this is the answer. So this work of gradually building relationships where those folk most impacted are at the center of the conversation, the center of the leadership, and the rest of us have to figure out, okay, how do we come alongside and respect their leadership on the issues that impact them most? And so that's the kind of organizing that we're trying to accomplish. It's messy, it's imperfect, we get it wrong all the time. Many of us who are more privileged have to go back and say, oh, that wasn't right. I've got to rethink how I act in this space. But to begin to really build this, as Reverend Sarah said, this cross-community, county-wide, nonpartisan, multiracial, multi-tradition coalition, that's the hard work that begins to chink away at this legacy that we've been dealing with. Mm-hmm. And I think moving forward, we made a commitment 10 10,000 engagement with voters in these next months on Sunday. So that's some of our work right now. Some of our work is to act in deep coalition with a variety of organizations to make clear to voters, okay, this is what the county commission race, this is what's at hand with this county commissioner race in November. We got, 1.3, but that's gotta be just the down payment on a promise moving forward.
District tax, $33 million, so thank you for that. Reverend Kane, I want to come to you and then swing to you about Charlie. So staying with kind of Foresight Strong and, one of the initiatives that was announced on Sunday, to Pastor Craig's point, as we think about this piece here in the November general election, child well-being is on the ballot. Whether all of our faith communities are ready to think about it this way or not, child well-being is on the ballot in terms of the choices that voters are going to make in the general election, voting for county commissioners, voting for state legislators in terms of Forsyth County delegation, of course, all the way up the ballot to the United States House and Senate races. And so one of the things that Forsyth Strong announced that I'd like to talk a bit more about is a focus on getting out the vote, being on the ballot this fall, and why this shift in heart and minds and the work to advance that's going to be so critical literally over these next few months as we move towards November.
Sure. As I was sitting there, I pulled something out of my pocket. It's a little wooden elephant. My daughter, when she graduated from Spelman College on May 17th, the next day we went to Thailand for 2 weeks. Spent time in Bangkok and then Koh Samui. And while we were out purchasing things, one of the things they gave to us were these little elephants. When we were in Koh Samui, we had the opportunity to go to an elephant sanctuary. Some want to go there to ride elephants. They consider those elephants to be very sacred, and so they want to protect and preserve the elephants. So at the elephant sanctuary, and we had a chance to feed the elephants. We had a chance to touch the elephants, stand between the elephants, and one of the elephants put his trunk around me. And when we think about a trunk, we don't necessarily think about it as being a muscle, which it is. And I realized in that moment, it could have done anything with me. Right. It wanted to. But I've been keeping this elephant in my pocket because it makes me think about 2 D words that sound the same but are quite different. One is dominion, which is what God has given us. The other word is domination, which unfortunately we substitute for dominion. And in issues of institutions and individuals that are incredibly important, sometimes we lose sight of what God has given us to do. And in terms of having dominion, God has given us dominion over everything in God's world except for each other. Instead, this sense of relationship that's been discussed here right now is what God wants us to focus on. My work I did at Duke for my thesis, for my doctoral ministry, my thesis was entitled The Redemption of Capitalism Through Christian Principles. What some have looked at and what they fail to realize is that Adam Smith, being the father of modern capitalism, when he spoke with the invisible hand, was speaking of deity. Because the book he wrote about a decade prior to that was a theory of moral sentiments, and something we've lost sight of, especially many of our private institutions. They were seminarists. So people were educated about God while they were being educated about how to move forward in this world. Hence the idea, I think the very false idea of political ideology and theology that there should be separation between church and state. That was not ever what was actually intended. Church was to inform state, states to be in relationship with church. When it comes to thinking about the elections and the opportunity to be impactful for our children, I think that one of the things that's in front of us is that sense of dominion. For those who have resources, God expects for us to use those to enrich and make lives better. For Adam Smith, in terms of capitalism, his aim and focus was, if you do well as a capitalist, hence we now have heard that we've now got, I think, our first trillionaire in the world with Elon Musk. If Elon Musk becomes a trillionaire, the community is supposed to benefit from it. That was what Adam Smith was after. Not you become a trillionaire, you go live in your castle on Mars. You're supposed to be impacting the community that is around you. And so for the sense of the resource aspect of how things are allocated, Winston-Salem, Forsyth County is not starved in terms of resources. I heard what Pastor Scovins what he said. He said resources being pulled away. That's been resources being a different decision being made regarding resource allocation. Unfortunately, the concept of community has been limited to those who look like me, who think like me, who vote like me, or so I think. It has not been a sense of understanding that even if there's differentiation of opinion, political, religious ideology, we're all a part of the community, and our aim should be, what can we do to make the community the best it can be? I think on the ballot right now, and we talked about this, I think a bit before, unfortunately, there's this concept of W.E.B. Du Bois talking about, actually John Morehouse spoke of the book, called the talented 10. The talented 10 were to move the communities forward. Unfortunately, our talented 10 have found ways to enrich themselves and separate themselves from community. And so now with issues like with IAF, it's like, okay, well, let's hear what the other 90% have to say about the situations. Hence, the idea of voting becomes that much more important. That some will think my one vote doesn't make a difference. It's not your one vote, it's the collective vote that makes a difference, and that has to be highlighted to help everyone understand that they need to vote. Therefore, the mechanism for voting, in terms of if you need a certain form of identification, stop fighting against that as an issue and get the identification.
And let me put something into that conversation I want you to engage.
Okay.
Because there was a gathering at First Baptist Church on Highland just a few weeks ago. And I think the most powerful thing that was said, because the whole point was to talk about the role of the church in mobilizing voters.
Yes.
And the most powerful thing that was said was, remember Chad Armstrong, one of your guys, came up there and said, listen, we can talk all about the role of the church, but what we need to know is that most of the people we need to reach ain't in our church. Okay? They're the inactive voters on the margins of community, right? And so in thinking about that, as a local church pastor, how do we take that insight in terms of the role of our faith communities in moving beyond the people who they're seeing every Sunday, because most of them are registered, most of them vote pretty regularly. It might be change the address because they move from one side of town to the other side of town, but actually reach the folks who, if we don't mobilize, we're just going to see the same results. They don't support a child welfare company.
One of the things I try to remind my congregation of frequently is Jesus did his best work outside of the temple.
That's right.
And so the idea of engaging with community, I would say where the frustration is the greatest is also the opportunity that is the greatest also. We, again, are a stone's throw away from Winston-Salem State University. Is there the opportunity to engage those students saying, you know, hey, you have something that you want to see, you want to see, have something done, organize and mobilize them to go out into community with you. Go into your community. Right across the street from us, some of you may know Michael Banner. He lives in the community. We helped him to set up the neighborhood association there. And one of the things we push for, we have our annual Family and Friends and Community Day, and we have voter registration that takes place there. So when people in the community come in who don't necessarily show up in our sanctuary, we're always reminded, get yourself registered to vote. It becomes very important. So unfortunately, from our pulpits, we can be preaching to the choir and the converted, and it can be well received because we're speaking to like-minded people. We've got to be willing, and it's a vision that God gave me when I became a pastor. We can either be a church in the community, meaning we got an address of 101 North Duluth Avenue, or we can be a community church. Therefore, God has dropped us into this moment, in this place, in this season to make an impact. And the impact is we got to build bridges to the community to help them know that we are here for them, and we're here to walk alongside with them. And in doing that, we've got to be a source of not us having all the answers, but helping them to work towards solutions that are going to impact and empower the community. And so I think voter registration drives are important, but we got to do it in a way where we meet people where they are. And when we do that in that fashion, it's a chance for us to get more people registered to vote. But then the flip part of it is, some of us have vans and buses and things of that at our churches. When it comes to voting, use them. Get them out to the community. We will take you to the polls. So don't say, well, I can't get there. So no, you can get there. We're going to get you there. So I think in some cases,
registration materials to you, right?
Absolutely. So I think one of the things strategically that has to be changed is not an inflammatory reaction to a change in the law and process and procedure, that by the time you can actually get from someone to protest, it's too late because the vote has taken place. If you know what the game is, as they say, you know, don't hate the game. Get in the game and figure out how you can win. And I think that's where our strategies have to be, to make sure we can mobilize people to exercise and use their voices.
Appreciate it. Thank you so much. So we are going to have a minute or two for questions. So anybody who's in the audience, and Mary Pat, I know you're kind of monitoring the feed there. If anybody has a question you want to drop in the chat, we'll have just a couple minutes for that. Rabbi Charles, I'm gonna put you on the spot a bit here as the rabbi in the room, right? It's been my hope to have you, my Greg here as well. He wasn't able to make it today just because we believe that the Faith Leaders Coalition across interfaith grounds is so important in terms of one of the Expressions Coalition. We've been talking about a lot of this, in the frame of kind of politics of Jesus and whatnot. What resonates most from your vantage point in the community that you serve in the Jewish vision with this work and kind of the principles that are taught there in terms of all of the different things that we kind of hit upon today in this conversation for how we create this culture of child well-being and shift these mindsets to save our sons and daughters the resources we have?
I guess I would just start the way that I began, which is this is central. This is central to who we are as a Jewish community. And we can touch on different pieces. When it comes to generosity, we had one of our families was a named donor, $500,000 for the All In for Our Schools campaign, right? We have, and in major conversations around these issues, especially, contributors to All In for Our Schools, on a variety of different levels. When it comes to the day-to-day commitment, week in, week out, we have partnered with Highland Presbyterian for over a decade to put together one of the community's first school-based food pantries, where we are at Moore Elementary, and they are coming and receive, families that in need can get food, and we do that. Again, we've been doing that for over a decade. That concrete benefit. And even on the private side of things, right? When the head of our food pantries came to us and said there was a family that needed some assistance, they were on their way out of their house. It wasn't $400, which was average, but they needed a little bit more assistance. So, me and Pastor Randy were able to just step up, and we were able to take care of it and help the families stay in their home. Which benefits, right? Not just family stability, but the children within that household. When it comes, so on so many different levels, theologically and Jewishly, right? There is this idea, because the problems are so big, right? The problems are so big that there's this beautiful teaching that, again, we repeat it over and over and over again, right? The words of Hillel, if I'm not for myself, who will be for me? Or we have to be able to care for ourselves and care for our well-being. And if I'm only for myself, then what am I? Right? And if not now, when? Right? Like, we need to act. And so that idea, when it comes to voting and voting rights, so Karen Dorr is in the audience, right? And so she's already been, so the Religious Action Center of Reform Judaism has a national campaign wherever Reform Jews are throughout the country to take part in an Every Voice, Every Vote campaign. And that's something that's just a part of what we do, and so the fact that Forsyth Strong is doing it, Lift Every Voice, where one of my congregants is a part of that initiative and helped to create that initiative. When it comes to voting and encouraging voting, that is central. And getting people out to vote is really, really important. And the work of Forsyth Strong, which overlaps, in my view, on so many different levels with How Are the Children. But that's about, we just got a public commitment to be in relationship with the mayor and 6 members of our city council, right? 4 members of our county commission. That's a public relationship which not only is about voting, but it's about having the relationship to share our stories and help them understand issues on a deeper level that won't just impact how we vote, it impacts how they vote, right? And so we're the only synagogue in Forsyth County. And there are too many coalitions for me to be on. It's only us, right? But my congregation, we just had our annual meeting a week ago, a little over a week ago. And I share with them all of the different kinds of things that they may or may not be aware of. And what is the response of our congregation to being a part of our Forsyth County community? It's gratitude. Rabbi, thank you so much for being a part of it. And it's not just me, because we've got members on Senior Services Board and Family Services Board. And I mean, our members are wrapped up in the work of this community. And so it's not just about preaching the values. I talk all the time, it's about living the values, right? And so we strive to do that. And when we and our people and our communities are living the values that we hold and that we constantly are trying to remind our people to do and uphold, well, I mean, then we just got to give that nudge and make it happen. And make it happen because, as we heard, right, there's a lot of strategies that already exist and that we know what to do. But that getting over that hump and getting over that hurdle, it takes a lot. But doing it in coalition and doing it in cooperation, even when we disagree, separation of church and state.
We're going to do another roundtable.
But the thing is that, but I know that we can have those conversations, and that we're not going to walk away from those conversations because of the relationships that have been formed, and that is central. That's central to the work that we're doing.
Thank you so much for that. So, thank you, Pastor Griffin, for making the time. So, we'll probably have time for maybe one question if there's one out there in the audience or online. I have asked this group and others who weren't able to be here today to, in an ongoing way, be a part of the Faith Leaders Coalition to help us as co-architects of this work, particularly the moral case that has to be made. And so there are further conversations that we're going to be having as a group as we lean into this collaborations and these partnerships and further opportunities to engage our faith communities as we seek to move this needle forward. So I just first of all want to thank you all for making the time today. I think it's been a really rich conversation. Are there any questions that we have from the audience that anyone would like to share? And if you hear what I ask you to do, if you're here in person, is come up towards this mic and in view of the camera here that Mary Pat has set up so that folks online can see you and just state your name and your question. All right, so come on. Yeah.
Thank you all for being here. I'm Linda Winnickoff, and I am here representing Winston-Salem Freedom Schools, in a way, I suppose. And what I want to bring up is the research of Harvard economist Raj Chetty and his work on economic mobility and his, what I call an indictment on Winston-Salem, Forsyth County, as having some of the lowest, if not the lowest, economic mobility in the country. And one of the things he talks about are the lost Einsteins in our communities. And this is my 6th year with Winston-Salem Freedom Schools. And I have seen over those 6 summers the lost, or what I would like to call the found Einsteins, throughout the talent that is in our community that is untapped. He also says that the greatest variable in promoting economic mobility is having diverse having social connections. You talk about relationships, but these are social connections for the children and the families to have access to different, to people from different economic backgrounds. So I would like to pose this question to the Home Moravian and to the First Press and the other churches. How do we create that dynamic? Our schools aren't doing it so that the children are exposed to different to other people from different economic levels. And because that's supposed to be the greatest variable, and how these found Einsteins, as I like to call them, musically, in science, I can identify, this is an engineer, she's got the mind of an engineer, or a musician, or an artist. I mean, we can see them, but they don't necessarily have the social connections to move forward. And so how do we create that in our community?
Thank you. So one thing I want to ask first before we kind of take that, is anybody here currently now or in the past hosting a Freedom School with your faith community? Pastor Manning, okay, you guys okay?
Trinity Moravian is.
Trinity Moravian, yeah, absolutely. Okay, and so either one of you, who's currently hosting Freedom School, just want to kind of speak to how this thing kind of resonates, and then sure, to those who she directed this question, either of you want to share, and then we'll get ready to close out today. So, Pastor Randy, Pastor Shaw, either of you.
We had hosted Freedom Schools at our church for about 4 years until, frankly, they outgrew Zion. And so the group that was hosting Zion moved over to United Metropolitan. That was with Terrence Hawkins.
Yeah.
And it was an incredibly rich experience, as you were describing. And one of the things that I would say environmentally was the opportunity to broaden horizons. I think one of the things that our challenge young people have, as Dr. Mendez was speaking of, was being oppressed people, adopting sometimes the mindset of the oppressor. It's not so much a matter you get out and you become the oppressor, it's a matter you adopt a mindset that you're supposed to be oppressed. And so with the Freedom School, it helps to build a sense of character, a sense of identity, a sense of hope. And as I speak about it theologically, I use hope as an acrostic. Heaven offers possibilities eternally. And so having the Freedom Schools actually operate within a church context, but not doing so where you're proselytizing, I think is very rich in the opportunity to bring people in, speakers, and have activities, because I know, and I'm still doing it now, when they were at Zion, because of my work at Forsyth Country Day School, I was on the board there, my children graduated from there. I reached out to Forsyth Country Day, and they provided buses for field trips, and they're still doing it now while they're at United Metropolitan. It was an opportunity for them to have resources poured in from different aspects. But to your point, I'm not sure how many here were actually born and raised here in Winston. I was. And one of the things that was to help to cross the divide, actually, when I was growing up here, was busing. I lived out in the county, I got bused into the city. The kids in the city got bused out into the county. So that intermingling took place, but also it gave you greater exposure to different demographics, socially, economically, and politically. Now the school choices, they've isolated. Hence you have schools that are in resource-starved areas, and they're resource-starved because, frankly, the rich people who could and would pour to those places, if their children went to school there, they don't have to. It doesn't happen anymore. We live out on the western side of the city. You go to parent-teacher night, you got to show up early because all of the little supply sheets are filled up by the time you get there. You go to East Winston, and you're having problems getting the parents to even show up. I'm not saying busing is a solution, but I would say there was more of an equitable outcome for students when busing actually occurred. The Freedom Schools are helping to energize the students, create more passion and vision, but there is a lot more work to be done, and some of that needs to be some of the cross-fertilization of engagement that I think really helps people to see what it's like to be on both sides of the table.
And we know that the school choice plan was a reaction to the busing, right? And resistance to that from certain parts of the community. And that's it. You had dropped two major things, but you spent a whole other round on that between church and state, busing, desegregation, and the legacy of all that. But I appreciate both of those. So, Pastor George, Pastor Amy,
Can I just add one piece on Freedom Schools?
yes, and then I want to because it goes back to this empathy.
No, so when I asked you, because Reverend Ford, I asked you about Freedom Schools and expanding Freedom Schools and this idea, I said, how many students are in Freedom Schools citywide?
Yeah.
And I think you told me, because I went to like this big celebration of Freedom Schools, and so I thought that it was pretty massive. And you told me that there was, 10 sites?
We have 12 to 14 sites.
10 sites plus the Wake Forest.
Yeah, so 11 sites.
But we're talking about
50 students, right?
50, let's say 70, average is 50 students.
We're talking about less than 600, around 600 students altogether. 700?
Okay.
700 students. When we have so many that could benefit and need to benefit. And I just wanted, that's the only point I wanted to make, is that as we talk about these programs, I heard Greater Winston-Salem talking about this great program for young adults or young people and teenagers and how awesome it is. And I was like, well, that sounds fantastic. How many people has it impacted? 100, right? And so these are programs that are working, that are bringing positivity, that need to be expanded.
And that's right, and that's where the resources come in that are needed to scale this. Because we really have become the flagship for the Freedom Schools in North Carolina at this point because of the strength and concentration of the Freedom Schools that we have in Winston-Salem and the growth that there has been over the years. But you're absolutely right, we're only reaching 700. And we need to be reaching at least 3 or 4 times that, right, level than that we're looking for. Just want to segue to you all and
Sure.
get ready to
Well,
close
Freedom
this out.
Schools have been a helpful way that our church has begun to make social connections with us. So we've been involved for a long time. We give $20,000 a year from our budget, and we're able to give $67 to help fund the executive director position.
Yes.
And was able to share that with our community and talk about that, which was a wonderful way to start pushing people a little bit. Many people are happy about it, a couple people not so happy about it, but it also provides some volunteer opportunities for people to be involved. The other thing our church has done that we would love to continue, and are trying to figure that out now, is we've had a relationship with Cook Elementary for 15 years and provided lunch buddies, so people would go and just have lunch with students every single week for the whole year, and volunteer to tutor and to read, or with the classrooms, or support teachers. As you all know, Cook has closed, and so we're looking for another local school close to us without those resources to be able to do that. Again, like I said before, we're good on the relationships.
Yeah, don't do that alone, do that in partnership.
Yeah, well, so here I am saying, you all know, I'm at a meeting with someone to talk about a school tomorrow. But I think those are some places, because our church does value relationships, and so those are things we're trying to get into, yeah. So those are 2 ways we do that.
Thank you. I know Dr. Mendez, I saw you want to get in here. Is there anything, Bernie, that either Pastor George or Pastor you have to add to that? Dr. Mendez, I'm going to let you kind of have the last word. I know we're right past 12. People stick around just a couple more minutes. This will be a good word to end on.
I'm sitting here, I'm sort of disturbed a little bit. I guess in a sense, you have to forgive me. I'm one of the last I was young, in a circle with Dr. King. And I'm listening to these presentations that go all the way back. I mean, it almost sounds like nothing has changed much. And as Christian leaders, as a church, and I'm glad you mentioned the thing of separation of church and state. I guess what I'm feeling and what's bothering me is that it sounds like the church has become too institutionalized. And we know the system, the institutions participate in oppression. And what's missing to me in the conversation is, how do we change? What do we do that's different from what the institutions do? And more importantly, do we have a collective vision of what this community and society ought to look like? And this just brings me back. I just lost my good friend Jesse Jackson a little while ago, but one of the things that we always talked about was when we needed to push the system, to protest, to make sure we got what we wanted and needed for this community. It's clear from the discussion today the differences between the black church and the white church. And I'm sitting here listening to those differences, and I thought the conversation got away from, and I was hoping to hear more about how the white church deal with their youth and children, because our children are not the only ones getting in trouble. But I lost sight of all that. And maybe for another conversation, we can really focus on that and talk about what we can do together for all of our children. And not just because the way that reporting goes, as well as the system, children of color are considered to be the worst.
Now, thank you for that. I think we have several points of discussion for our next roundtable. The energy we've had here, and some of the unresolved questions.
But just, let me just say this last thing. Too late to talk about it now, but I'm concerned about, and I've been an activist pastor all my life, all these roadblocks and everything that we're talking about, resources. We know historically, resources do not go to the black community the way it goes to the white community. We need to say that. Those are some of the issues that I think need to be discussed, but more importantly, can we form a coalition, because we did it before, to make the demands? I'm not talking about asking. I'm tired of that. But making demands for where these needs are. And we'll get it. We would get it. And we would get it at a quicker, in a quicker way if we do it together. Early on, we had to do it as a black church, as a black community, and a lot of things that I was able to do, I did it without money. That was the other thing that came up. Our tithes and offerings sponsored and supported our summer youth camp. I asked, and it was organized mainly for poor folk. And I let the parents pay as they go. So by the end of the program, just about the majority of the parents paid. It was a low cost, but the goal of the program was to expose the kids to so much of what was going on in Winston, and we even took them to Alabama, New York, and different places, and whatnot. But it can be done. You know, whether we get the money from the system or not. Our churches can do this if we make that a priority. one of the things I realized early on was that in most churches, the youth were not even included in the budgets. I set up a budget specifically for youth. They had their own budget. And then some of the older young people had fundraisers for the summer youth camp so the kids could travel and get around and get exposed. But I guess I'm gonna shut up after this. Let's not forget the importance and necessity when it is time for it to do protests and to make demands what we need for our, because the bureaucracy, the status quo, will not do it, as Dr. King used to say. It must be demanded by the oppressed, because they do not voluntarily give up anything. And I think we can do that. When I was talking about Rabbi Leachute, early on, we did some things together.
Absolutely.
We can make things happen. But I just had to say that.
I appreciate that, Doc. Thank you. And we are going to do this again. Thank you to all those who joined us. Mary Pat for helping get everything set up with our live stream. Rabbi Charlie for being such a faithful host here at Temple Emmanuel. Thank you.
Appreciate y'all. Thank you.
Hey, listen, y'all. Really